A little bit more about the Iowa Learning Farms for those that might not be familiar. We were established in 2004, and our goal is to build a culture of conservation by working with farmers and landowners and researchers to implement practices that improve water quality and soil health while remaining profitable. And this is all made possible thanks to our great partners, which include Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Iowa Department of Natural Resources, US EPA Section 319, Conservation Districts of Iowa, Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, GrowMark, Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, and the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. So there's a bit of housekeeping before we get going today. I do ask that you remain muted and with your cameras off during the video presentation. That way we can just sit back and enjoy the field footage we're able to share with you. And then following the videos, we'll have a time for Q&A and discussion. So you can either submit those questions via the chat box, or you will be invited to unmute to ask questions again following the video. So until then, please just stay muted. Following today's presentation, you'll be receiving an email to let us know and evaluate the virtual field day. So we do ask that you send that back, because this is just the start of the conversation. We ask that you network with folks that maybe couldn't make it today. The benefit of being virtual is that this is being recorded. And in that email, you'll get a link to today's virtual field day recording, so you can share that with folks. And if you choose to, you can provide us with your mailing address, and we'll get you a free ILF neck gaiter by completing that evaluation. So again, we're going to be highlighting Oxbows today. We've got a great set of speakers for you, including Karen Wilke, the Iowa Freshwater Specialist and Boone River Project Director for the Nature Conservancy, Jeff Pudenz, who's a Greene County landowner, Darrick Weissenfluh, a private lands fish and wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Osterhaus and Sam Leberg, research assistants at Iowa State University. So without further ado, I'm going to play the videos. Again, you're welcome to stay muted with cameras off until the videos are done playing.
My name is Karen Wilke, and I'm the Boone River Project Director for the Nature Conservancy in Iowa. Today we're in the Boone River watershed. Welcome. This is a place where over 30 different partner organizations have come together for the last 17 years to help address water quality, flooding, and wildlife issues. Oxbows are old river meanders that get cut off from the main flow of the river. Healthy, functional oxbows can provide really valuable benefits for water quality, wildlife, and floodwater storage. However, over time, many of these oxbows fill in with sediment and cease to provide those benefits. And so that's where restoration comes into play. The restoration that we're at today was restored in 2017, about 4 years ago. When we came to this site, it was not holding any water, was not really providing those benefits that it used to provide. And so we came out, it's pretty basic, it's not a really engineered practice. We dug out the soil that had filled in over the years, and now it's holding water year-round for wildlife. There's a natural connection to the creek, so anytime it floods, that water comes in. That allows the fish and wildlife to access the oxbow. And then the floodwaters recede, and it's the standalone habitat in the floodplain. This oxbow is about 1/4 acre in size, which is just perfect for supporting the federally endangered Topeka Shiner. We want them to be small so that predatory fish don't come in and gobble them up. It's about 3 feet deep. I would say on average they're 3 to 5 feet that we have to dig out for them to hold water year round so that they don't freeze in the winter and they don't dry up in the summer. On average, the cost to restore is about $10,000 to $15,000. This one, which is 1/4 acre, it only costs $7,000 to provide these really great benefits on the landscape. We're monitoring this site for both water quality and fish wildlife habitat. We're trying to see if the water coming in from tile into this oxbow, how much is being treated by, naturally filtered by this oxbow. And so we've got tile coming in from the farm behind us. It's being intercepted by this oxbow and held and naturally filtered before it gets into the creek. This site has tile coming off of the farm ground flowing into the oxbow, which holds that water and filters it through denitrification before it gets into the creek. On average, our research has shown that 42% of the nitrates that come off of that farm field get processed by this oxbow before it gets into the creek. Our oxbow project in the Boone has been a really great collaboration of so many different partners that have brought different expertise and funding together to piece together all of the great benefits that oxbows are providing. So we're partnering with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Iowa State University, Iowa Soybean Association, and so many more to get the research done to really show the benefits that these restorations are having, as well as inform future restorations to maximize the benefits that we're getting out of these restorations. Oxbows are typically not in agricultural land, so it's a really easy sell for the landowners. No land needs to be taken out of production, and it's typically right along the stream, so it's land that's not really being used anyways. And look at how beautiful we can make it through restoration. This is just increasing the aesthetic and conservation value of the land and provides a really great space for people to get out and enjoy nature. Here we're at an unrestored oxbow, and one that really does need restoration. It's not holding water or providing the benefits that it really could be providing. So once we find a potential oxbow with an interested landowner, and we've discussed the goals that that landowner has for that land, then we'll want to go out to the site to actually visit it. We want to see that restoration is feasible, that it would be beneficial, and then it would help us prioritize, if we have different restoration sites to compare, which one would be the most beneficial to restore. So once we're at the site, there's a lot of different things that we'll look for that would help us prioritize this site for restoration. One being, is it already holding water? Is it already providing benefits? This one's clearly not holding water. Another one is there the opportunity for tile to come in and be intercepted by the oxbow? Another is, are there any beneficial wildlife that would really benefit from us restoring the oxbow? Or consequently, are there any that would be harmed by restoration? So right here, we've got Topeka Shiner habitat in the creek right here. So we know, or we believe, if we restore this oxbow, they're going to utilize that habitat. Another thing we want to think about is, what is the current land use and what is the future land use? This right here is in pasture, so we're going to want to make sure we include characteristics to this restoration that will be conducive to cattle accessing that water and not eroding the banks too much. So we'll do really gentle slopes. We'll want to look and see, does this oxbow naturally connect to the creek, or are we going to have to somehow artificially connect it during floods? Also, is there an easy way for heavy equipment to get in that won't be so harmful to the land? Where can the soil be put? If it's close, we've got a farm field right here. Oftentimes it's nice black dirt, we can just put and spread the dirt right in the adjacent farm field. If we have to haul it far, it's going to increase the cost. Another thing that could increase the cost is if there's a lot of trees. Obviously this site doesn't have any trees, so that really helps us use our money more wisely and get us the best conservation bang for the buck. Finally, we'll want to look at potential risk of sedimentation in the future. Is there a lot of erosion coming off the landscape? Or is the creek, the force of the creek going to come straight into the oxbow and potentially fill it in with the sediment that the creek is carrying? After we've decided that the site would be beneficial to restore, we're going to want to come out and do a survey of the site to collect elevation data in order to create designs and know how deep to dig the oxbow. The land will need to be surveyed by survey grade or laser level equipment in order to collect elevation data. Of course, a professional will need to do this, or at least have an engineer stamp off to make sure that all of your data is accurate so that we're not creating any issues. This can be done by NRCS, Nature Conservancy, Fish and Wildlife. There's a lot of different partners who are out there to help with these restorations. A couple different elevation data that you're going to want to make sure you capture are cross sections across the potential oxbow that you're going to be restoring, at least at every topography change or every 100 feet. This one's pretty much the same across the board, so wouldn't change very much. You'll want to collect elevation data of the adjacent creek as well. That'll show how deep we are going to want to restore the oxbow. What is the current width and top width and bottom width of the adjacent creek? That might tell us how wide we want to plan this restoration so that we can account for how much water is going to be coming down that river and coming into the oxbow. And then we'll also want to do a center line down the deepest part of the oxbow so that we know where that deepest spot is going to be. And all of this data is going to feed into our design. From start to finish, from the site visit until you're done with the restoration, would typically take about a year. It takes quite a while to get permits in place and do the survey and design, but then the actual digging and restoration with the heavy equipment takes less than a week, depending how big it is. So it's a pretty quick and easy restoration practice. So we've restored likely over 150 oxbows across Iowa. And over the last 20 years, we found 2 inches of sedimentation out of the 5 feet on average that we dig out. So we're hopeful that this restoration practice will be on the landscape for a very, very long time, and we'll get to enjoy those great benefits. Oxbows are not unique to the Boone River watershed. They are found across Iowa and beyond, and there are potential for restorations across Iowa and beyond. And so there's a lot of different organizations that can help with technical assistance and financial assistance. So check your local NRCS offices and try to find those partners who can help restoration.
Hi, I'm Dylan Osterhaus. I am a graduate student in the Department of Natural Resources, Ecology, and Management at Iowa State University, and my master's research focuses on the Topeka Shiner and Oxbows in Iowa. Over the last 2 years, we've caught over 6,000 fish at this site, representing around 20 species each year. Our most abundant species has been the black bullhead, which we did not manage to collect today, but our second most abundant species over the last 2 years has been the common shiner. One of the main goals of these oxbow restorations is to benefit the federally endangered Topeka shiner by providing critical habitat that the species relies on for reproduction. We did not manage to collect any Topeka shiners today, however, we have captured over 500 at this site in the last 2 summers combined. The Topeka shiner is a federally endangered species in Iowa, and the listing of the species resulted from the declines in the population and distribution of the species, which is mostly correlated with habitat loss across the range. This habitat loss is likely due to the loss of oxbow and floodplain habitats in Iowa as the landscape was transitioned from a native prairie landscape to agriculture and these habitats were destroyed. Habitat restoration in the form of oxbow restoration has provided numerous new habitats across the landscape in the Boone River watershed for the species, which has led to us collecting higher numbers of the species at these sites, including over 500 at this one site in the last 2 summers, which is extremely exciting given the rarity of the species in Iowa. These restorations are also extremely beneficial for a wide variety of other flora and fauna such as waterfowl, ducks, geese, also aquatic invertebrates, aquatic plants, many mammals, as well as turtles and other amphibians, and really the landscape as a whole benefits from having these habitats present within the floodplain of the river. The common shiner is one of the most abundant species in this site. We collected over 4,000 at this site over the last 2 summers. When we're sampling these sites, we pull a seine across the entire length of the oxbow and then count and measure each fish that we collect after identifying them to species. Once we are done taking our data, we return the fish to the oxbow unharmed. Prior to restoration, this site held no water. Currently, there is plenty of water in this site, which provides good quality habitat for a variety of fish, including sport fish such as this bluegill, as well as many northern pike and black bullheads. These oxbows also provide a great recreational opportunity for the landowners whose land they're on in the form of fishing and also for waterfowl and upland game hunting. These oxbows provide great habitat for a variety of animals other than fish, such as the crayfish and tadpoles and frogs we have in here, as well as turtles. Other than the Topeka shiner, many other rare species of fish in Iowa benefit from these oxbows restorations, such as the carmine shiner we have in here, as well as plains top minnow, rock bass, and Iowa darter. The restoration of these oxbows is extremely beneficial to a variety of flora and fauna in Iowa. And given the small impact these oxbows have on the amount of land they take up and the huge impact they have on our native flora and fauna, they are a great investment for Iowa's water quality in the future.
All right. So I know Karen had a few other things she wanted to share before we open it up for Q&A, but feel free to get those questions entered into the chat box and we'll get to them shortly.
All right. And can you guys hear me okay? This is Darrick talking.
Yes.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Darrick Weissenfluh. I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. And we're going to just take a few minutes. We've only got a few slides and then open it up to questions. But we wanted to give folks an opportunity to hear from a landowner who has experience with oxbows as well. And so the photo you can see on the screen here is an aerial photo of Jeff Pudenz's property. Jeff and Nancy are shown in the photo there. And Jeff first called me down to his property in 2017 to look at that small tributary stream that you can kind of see right by the photo of us, and some of his concerns with erosion, and also his interest in improving his land for wildlife habitat. And so we started there on that creek and did some cool beaver dam analog stuff. And from there it's continued. Our partnership continues today. We've done some fen wetland enhancements as well as prairie and oakland enhancements. And of course, why we're here today is to talk about oxbow restorations. And you can see a couple of those on this aerial photo. And so these were most recently completed in partnership with Jeff and Nancy, as well as NRCS, the local field office. And there's another oxbow. That upper right one you see there is actually on a neighbor's property. That was completed by Fish and Wildlife Service and that landowner in 2010. And so you can kind of see how these, once there's one or two in the landscape, they continue to be a focus, and you can really build a good collection of oxbows. So I will turn it over to Jeff maybe to talk a little bit about his oxbows. And I should mention, Karen, if you can go back one slide, these are in a different watershed than the video. And so Jeff is in the North Raccoon watershed, whereas the video was shot in the Boone River watershed. But we got Jeff here, and I'd like to give Jeff a chance just to talk about this slide and what we can see, and then we can go through the next couple slides. Jeff?
You hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Darrick. Hi, I'm Jeff Pudenz. I'm a Greene County farmer. What I can tell you about these projects in my own experience is, yes, they might take a week or two to establish, but I've been involved in mine for about 5 years now. It took 2 years for the weather to cooperate for us, even though we had the permits and we had to extend the permits and everything. And then it took, like he said, a week, like they said, it took a week to get it dug out. Be patient. It takes a lot of patience. And it's also good that you have this time, because what you're doing is going to last a long, long time. It should last years and years down the road. And you need to think about your goals and what you want to achieve. One of my goals is I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Get involved. Be involved with your people. And you have to know your contractor and know and trust the people you're working with. There's many different programs. There's Fish and Wildlife, NRCS, EQIP, REAP. Ask around and get to know everybody well and learn as much as you can about it. And when you decide to go and do it, be involved, like I said, because you're only going to get into it what you take out, or you're only going to get what you put into it. That's what I'm trying to say. Some of the things you have to think about is the dirt spoils. They do have a value. Usually the dirt in these things are pretty highly nutritious. The disturbance on the ground, what's going to happen to the ground before and after, and afterwards, who's going to seed the ground down, and what kind of seedings do you want to put in the ground? For me, for instance, we put some flowers in, we put some different grasses in, put a duck house up, just to keep the area more or less in good conservation. I really can't tell you too much else right now.
I'm sure there'll be questions for you here in a little bit.
I'll work better with questions than just talking.
Thank you, Jeff. That was nice to hear your perspectives. And yeah, we just have a couple more really quick slides, but then if any of the participants have questions, Jeff will be on the rest of the meeting. So please feel free to chime up after we're done with these quick slides. Well, the slide moves forward when I don't want it to, but then not when I do want it to.
Must be like me talking.
Mm-hmm. Let's try it this way. Let's refresh. There. As Darrick mentioned, the sites that were featured in the video were not the same as Jeff's from that past picture on the previous slide. So we just wanted to show an aerial photo of the sites that were featured in the video, just for some perspective. And can you guys see my mouse when I move it around? Or no? Yeah. You can. Okay. So, you know, on the left-hand side is the 1930s aerial image, and on the right is present. And so, you know, down here in the bottom right, you can see that was the restored oxbow that we featured. And then the unrestored oxbow is this kind of muddy pile here north of the road. And that one is scheduled to be restored hopefully this year. So, but you can see that same pasture, you know, back the path that the river used to flow. That pasture has lots of opportunities for other oxbows and holding more storage on the landscape. So just wanted to give everybody a high level view of where we were for the actual field portion of this event. Also just wanted to show a nice before after picture of what these restorations look like. So at the top right, you can see, you know, before restoration, often they're not holding any water at all. And then after we dig them out, they typically hold water every year. I've been going at this for 7 years, and this past year was the only year I've ever seen them dry up, but usually they hold really good water year round. It just takes a pretty severe drought to dry them up. You can also see a picture of what Dylan was talking about in seining the oxbows with a big net, getting the fish out. And he talked a lot about the importance of monitoring, especially for tracking the benefits of these restorations for Topeka Shiner, which is this fish in the bottom left. It's a little federally endangered fish that really benefits from these habitats. And so it's important for us to be able to show the benefits that we're having through water quality and fish monitoring. Lastly, I just wanted to put in a plug for something that is coming soon. Me and a bunch of partners are working on putting together an oxbow restoration toolkit and training. This is going to be more geared for conservation professionals across the state of Iowa. Basically, it's going to be a step-by-step guide that will walk conservation providers through how to do an oxbow restoration. So it'll provide you with all the tools and the resources and knowledge that you'll need to complete a restoration from start to finish. That should be done this coming summer, and this summer or fall, we hope to have hopefully an in-person, if not a virtual training that would walk through that same content and, you know, launch the toolkit a little bit more. So big thanks to Fish and Wildlife Service, Darrick, and Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, and the Iowa Soybean Association, as well as many other partners who are helping to pull that toolkit together. That is coming soon, so keep your eyes out for it. If you want to be on a list of somebody who makes sure you get it, just drop me an email and we'll make sure that it gets in your hands once it's finalized. Here's Darrick and my contact information. If anybody doesn't feel comfortable talking today, feel free to anytime drop us an email or a call if you have questions. And then just a list of all the folks who are on the call today and who were in the video to help answer questions that you guys have. So that's about all I've got, and we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, we've gotten quite a few. So I'm going to backtrack here and start these off. So question for you, Karen. How are man-made oxbows different from typical scrapes done for wetland restorations? Is it mainly in the fact that they have a surface connection to streams and rivers?
Yeah, I would say the hydrology is different too. These things have a history of being connected to groundwater and, you know, being a part of the stream. And so when you dig them out, they're just hydrologically more ready to connect to the stream in beneficial ways for holding water than if you would just scrape in a random spot. I don't have any background in just creating
oxbows where they're not historically present. But maybe Darrick has any comments or insights.
Well, I think what you said is spot on in that, oxbow restoration is restoring something that was part of the old river channel. So it's the scar. If we're talking about, there are off-channel wetlands that also exist in floodplains that are not the actual river channel, but are hydrologically wetlands. And they do connect also to the stream, but in different ways, again, because they weren't an old scar. And there are folks doing creation of wetlands. I'll say that. And you can get benefits from them, but of course, there's a little bit different considerations for those than what we're talking about today, which is geared towards the restoration of historic river channels or the oxbow scars.
All right, this one's for Sam or Dylan. Related to the Topeka Shiner, they're asking, what is a good normal pool for a Topeka Shiner that allows them to thrive while keeping predatory fish at bay?
So in our last 2 summers of work, we never really ran into too much of an issue with too many predatory fish in a site, but it does seem that Topeka Shiner likes some of that shallow water within a site. So it's probably key to have a diversity of depths within the Oxbow site, both some to provide that shallow water habitat for Topeka Shiner, and then also deeper water, which would serve as refuge for intensive droughts like we had this last summer.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add there. That's pretty spot on for what we found. They definitely tend to prefer the shallower habitats.
All right, Karen, you mentioned this briefly in the video, but what are some major sources of funding for these restorations?
Yeah, in the last couple of years, oxbows were added to the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, which opened up a lot of state funding for these restorations. So you can get funding through Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. It is an EQIP program practice. But there's lots of other sources, like if you have a water quality initiative or other state watershed funded program, you could utilize that funding as well if it was written into that project, that watershed. And then there's a lot of private partners out there too. Iowa Soybean Association, myself, Nature Conservancy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it sort of depends where you're at and, if you're in a priority watershed. But typically the first place to start is just your local NRCS office, and they would hopefully know, what other partners would be able to help provide funding.
Maybe I'll toss this one to Darrick, but feel free to chime in if anyone else has comments on this question in particular. They're asking, any special considerations for an oxbow created by creek straightening? And does the Army Corps need to be involved if the oxbow is adjacent to a perennial stream?
Okay. I would say there are additional considerations if you're in a straightened stretch of creek. Sometimes that means they dug out that new stretch of creek and then use the sediment to fill in what was the old river channel. So you can run into some really funky soils in those areas. But if we're talking about oxbow restoration and the scars, we're still looking at the same depth information as far as what that historic depth of that river creek was, and making sure that it can function with the new ditched section. So sometimes I've been in places in the North Raccoon watershed where that ditched section of creek or the created section of creek is a lot lower than the historic stream was, which could mean in the oxbow digging it, deeper than we actually want it. And so you just gotta, that's where the conservation professionals can help out and take a look at things and try to help guide some of those restoration questions. With regards to permitting, in almost all cases, floodplain permits are required, or at least there's a notification requirement. So without getting into too much detail, if you're within the 100-year floodplain in Iowa, it's regulated by both Iowa DNR and Army Corps of Engineers. And while there are certain circumstances where maybe a permit won't be required or there's exemptions, I strongly encourage everyone to actually follow through with those two agencies to make sure that a permit is or isn't needed. And I'll just say that there's an online tool now called Permit, PERMT, if you just Google that in Iowa DNR, it actually has the first stage where you can click on a map on your property and an oxbow, and it'll tell you if you will likely need permits. And that's what I would strongly recommend.
And speaking of permits, someone had asked why it's so hard to get those permits if these oxbows are doing so much good.
Fair question. I would say that, you know, a lot of times that is the case. There is possibilities to make problems, and that's why there's permitting. That means for your neighbors typically. So the reason there is that process is so they can evaluate impacts upstream and downstream from an oxbow restoration or other practices. And generally, oxbows are just an excavated pool of water. You're not building dikes or other things that hold back water. And that's why generally it still takes a while to get through the review process, but it always goes through in my experience. Whereas if you're building a dam or a dike, that has a lot of other impacts. And so we're hoping that we can make that a more streamlined process, in the future. But I think my experience with DNR and Army Corps is, once they see what it is and if the design matches the goals, they're pretty quick once it gets in their queue to approve that. So.
And Karen did.
May I add that a little bit?
Yeah, certainly.
You don't want this process to go fast. There's a lot of variables here that Darrick's talking about. For instance, if you're in this 100-year floodplain, the spoils have to be removed off of that 100-year floodplain. So this is something that you're creating for a long, long time. You really don't want to speed through it.
And Karen did share a link to that permitting page that Darrick referred to. So you can find that in the chat box from the Iowa DNR. So speaking of the spoils, after excavation, is the bottom of the oxbow typically still black dirt?
In my case, no. I had one that was black dirt, and then I had one that was still was the original creek bottom.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. Typically, that's how you know when to stop digging. You'll hit that old riverbed and it'll look different. You'll start to hit gravel or sands or blue clay, and then you know that you've dug deep enough. But every restoration is different. Darrick and I talk about that all the time. We just never know what we're going to run into. So that's just part of the fun of it and lessons learned, which will be a chapter of the toolkit. Because there are so many things that we run into that you just never would have expected. So, but yeah, typically it looks different, and then you're in the right spot.
All right, this one's for Sam and Dylan. Back to the Shiner, having to do with the fact that this oxbow is getting some nitrate being fed by that nearby field. So does the amount of nitrate being fed into the oxbow have any negative effect on the Topeka Shiner? Or are they adapted to higher levels of nitrate in the water?
This is the topic of my graduate thesis. So far, we haven't really detected any differences between at least the relative abundance of Topeka Shiners in tile-fed and non-tiled oxbows. In general, in past projects, it has seemed like they're pretty tolerant of poor water quality, whether that's turbidity or higher nutrients. But I haven't finished my thesis, so I don't know for certain about what we'll find.
So then either with your study there, Sam, or Karen in your work, any comparisons of the water quality of the nearby oxbows and the newly constructed oxbows? So comparison of the original versus these restored.
Hard to compare because most of them aren't holding any water at all. So it's hard to test the water quality when there's no water there. However, natural oxbows that don't have tile coming into them, I guess, would obviously have a much lower nitrate content. But yeah, it's a little bit hard to quantify the processing of an unrestored versus a restored. I don't know. Does anybody else have a better answer than that?
Yes, I think I could add to that. When you just restore a new oxbow, you're going to have disturbed all the ground around it in that. And there, a lot of times in my instance, we needed to reseed around that. until that new oxbow is aged, where all the seeding in that is back to natural, you're going to have some difficulties.
We've done some research on natural oxbows and how they remove the nitrates just from floodwater. And it found it takes about 21 days for floodwater to get back down to, a normal level of nitrates after the flood. And so naturally there's basically almost no nitrate coming in, but when you do have that flood pulse, it introduces some. And same thing with having tile, like, when the tile is really flowing, you have a huge introduction. With the tile fed ones, it takes maybe, if the water can sit there for at least a month, we can remove almost 100%. It just depends. If that tile continues to flow, then obviously it's just flowing straight out into the stream and we're losing about, 40 to 50% of the nitrate just straight out to the stream. So capacity is a consideration, and we talked about knowing what your goals are. If your goals are strictly for fish habitat, you might design your restoration a little bit different than if you were really trying to maximize storage and water quality.
Someone's curious, any idea how many restoration opportunities there are in Iowa?
So that's a really fun question. We're slowly mapping our way across the state. I tried to map all of them in the Boone River watershed, which is about 500,000 acres. So, small compared to the whole state. I found over 400 potential restorations just in the Boone. So if you multiplied that across the state, tens of thousands at least, I would say. What do you think, Darrick? I don't know.
I think that's a great summary, just because you've done that on that watershed scale. I've done it on individual creeks in the North Raccoon watershed, a much bigger watershed with bigger tributary creeks. And I have certain creeks that have over 300 potential oxbow restorations. I think the one thing we should emphasize is, oxbows are a natural creek formation. And so that's a natural process to create oxbow scars and for a stream over time to straighten and to change sinuosity and so forth. And so not all oxbows need to be restored. And there are very high quality oxbows on the landscape right now that have very good wildlife benefits and vegetation communities. And then there's many more in my experience so far that are completely silted in or majority silted in and are not, holding water or doing much for wildlife right now. And those are the ones we really want to target.
So related to that and your identification, if the land is available, would it make more sense to restore the original meander or just the oxbow? So back to your maps that you showed how meandering the stream was,
Yep.
They're asking, should it be restored to the meander or just the oxbow?
Well, the two are the same, at least how I think of them. So the meander is the oxbow. And so there are a lot of different design considerations and cost considerations and permitting considerations. So if best case scenario, like the one that Karen showed, which is the oxbow that was featured, in my personal professional opinion, I would say that you would want to restore as much of that meander as you can, because it's all filled in. But like Dylan said, because that's in a Topeka Shiner stream, I would be looking to create as many differences in elevation and so forth as I can to benefit Shiner and other wildlife as well. And so sometimes what you'll see in oxbows we've done and others do is, because of the concerns with predatory fish and other things, we might dig smaller excavations as part of a larger meander. And that, again, what that does is it adds diversity of depth to an oxbow. So some parts of the oxbow still have sediment, some have been removed, and that adds that depth variation. There really is no one size fits all. It depends where you're located, what the goals are, and that's probably the biggest thing. Like, what is your goal? Is it for Topeka Shiner? Is it for some other habitat benefit? Is it for cattle? Like, what's the goal? That's how it should be designed.
So I'll open this one up to Jeff and or Karen. Do you have a ballpark figure that contractors are charging to remove the spoils off site? And has anyone had any luck selling large quantities of spoils?
Well, I guess I'll grab that. Expensive. The further you go, the more it's going to cost. It depends on who's looking for good black dirt, or if you have a knob in the area where you need the black dirt put on. But it's definitely a sellable project, or I mean, a sellable product.
Yeah, I would agree. And it also really depends where you are in the state. Restorations that I'm doing in the Boone are much cheaper than ones that you would do in like the Des Moines metro, or, you know, closer to an urban epicenter. Those ones can cost up to 3 or 4 times the amount that you could restore them in a more rural area. And then the distance that you're hauling, yeah, is a huge factor. I have tried to sell it before, or not even sell it, but just like give it away, because then that decreases our cost of having to haul it. Make sure you get it in writing, because I had that person back out at the last minute, and then we'd had nothing to do with all of this dirt. So just another lesson learned.
So I'm going to toss this one to our wildlife and fish specialists here. Is there a minimum depth you shoot for to prevent takeover by aquatic invasive vegetative species, such as narrowleaf cattail?
I'll take a stab, Dylan, and you guys can chime in. But I mean, so it's very interesting to me, given the challenges we have with hybrid cattail in the state, that we, you know, in most cases, you don't get oxbows having a cattail problem. And that's primarily because of the depth, right? One, we're restoring them to the old stream bottom, which is not the best substrate for cattails. They do like all the sediment that's filled in cattails, but they can't really handle the water depth and that substrate once the stream bed has been exposed again. So a lot of times you'll hear these referred to as lakes. They are far more lake-like because there isn't that emergent vegetation than they are, I'd say, kind of wetland-like, depending on how you excavate them and design them. And so we really don't have those issues with cattail that I've seen anywhere in the Des Moines lobe. So.
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly. I think we've only ever found any cattail in one site maybe, and it was gone the next year. And I think invasives in general, we don't really have that many issues with. We had some water milfoil in one site, but I think besides that, we just haven't had really any issues.
So staying with the vegetation train, Jeff or Karen and your restorations, and Darrick too, have you been successful at vegetation establishment other than reed canary grass?
Absolutely. Yes, I put a CP 42 mix in there. And of course, I put a cover crop of oats in there, and it is establishing pretty fast.
Yeah, I'll say again, if it's done right from the beginning, you have a decent chance. Of course, the challenge with reed canary grass is the long term, and being in a floodplain, that seed bank never goes away. So I think, there again, every attempt should be made to establish natives, and like Jeff with pollinators, if you get the right hydrology following the restoration, like it's been dry since Jeff's have been restored, mostly dry in the floodplain, that gives that vegetation a chance to establish. Where you get flooded immediately afterwards, I'd say your chances are pretty slim. One thing that I'm experimenting with is wild rice in oxbows. So I'm familiar with Minnesota more, but wild rice is very common in Iowa historically, and it's not anymore. Again, because wild rice can handle the depth, I think it potentially could do decently in some of these oxbows, but it's also sensitive to water quality and turbidity. So that's yet to be determined. But I think as conservation professionals, those of us on this call, we want to keep looking at ways we can promote that native vegetation diversity, both in the water and on the banks in the disturbed areas, as much as we can, and know that there are limitations in certain areas.
So this one gets to design elements. What sort of control structures are used to allow water in and out? Do you you use physical structures like a saturated buffer or bioreactor, what's your method of controlling the water levels?
Typically, a structure is not needed as long as the grade of your connection is okay. Typically, these have a natural connection to the stream that allows, the stream pulse to come in, and then the oxbow itself is dug deeper. So then that's actually holding, the right amount of water that you would need for wildlife. Darrick, do you have any experience with structures or altered connections?
Extremely rare circumstance to have a structure, and it can obviously impact then your fish and wildlife community, especially fish, because a structure could be a barrier. So in most of our oxbows, we're trying not to use them, and there's no need to use them because we want, again, that natural flooding connection to happen. And as you saw in the video, they did kind of zoom in on that connection, and you guys can watch it again. It's a relatively small diameter relative to the overall oxbow if it's restored or constructed. And that's, that sets the grade essentially for that connection. And it allows a normal flood event to connect, but it also allows just bank full events. So just where the water gets to the top of the bank to connect, which increases that frequency of connection to your oxbow. So if you put a structure in, structures are meant to allow water one way typically. And there are other designs, but in most cases, we're not advocating for structures on these. And I'd say in most cases, landowners won't be happy with them. A lot of landowners want structures for various things, including wetlands, but there is a maintenance component, and muskrats and beaver and everything else tend to clog them. So they can have a lot of adverse impacts too.
Karen, you mentioned the cost differences depending on where you are. So have you done many urban restorations of oxbows?
Yeah, we've supported and partnered on many of them in the Des Moines Metro, which were really great for, just raising an awareness of the practice, and especially in fundraising with private donors to support upstream wetland restorations. And then there's a huge appetite for it out in the Cedar River watershed, especially around Cedar Rapids. Anything to help, slow the water and filter it upstream. The city has been very supportive, and there's a lot of, landowners who are interested in that as well. So yeah, urban ones are great. And, there might be, we've never really done the research on the benefits of like stormwater, filtering versus farm tile filtering, but there might be some differences, and it could be an interesting practice that fits in well in an urban environment because they're so small. And yeah.
So in the video, the one place is a pasture. So there was a question of, are there instances in which there are regulations to prevent livestock from accessing the oxbows?
I don't know of any. Darrick, do you?
Nope. We, at least, in most cases, we view it as compatible. I think, again, the consideration is, in my opinion, it's following restoration and seeding. Do you want cattle in there during establishment? No. So there might be some exclusion necessary at that point. But generally speaking, we think it's a great opportunity to collaborate with the grazing community as well, and to have those benefits. So I think I'm not aware of any regulations or permits that are necessary.
It's a great, out of the stream watering source for livestock. And we've done many of these in pastures and never really had any issue with, the cattle creating any additional water quality issues that impact fish or, sedimentation, anything like that. So like Darrick said, it seems very compatible.
Dylan, someone had a question on, have you documented common carp reproduction in these habitats?
We have in just a few instances. So common carp don't really seem to be a huge problem in these sites, but that's probably pretty variable across the range of these sites in Iowa. But for Salmon Eyes project, we've only had a handful of sites where we've documented juvenile common carp.
And I would just add that in my experience, where you see common carp, and Dylan chime in, is usually on degraded oxbows. I mean, sometimes restored oxbows will have them, but where I see the greatest abundance so far has been on unrestored oxbows that are barely functioning. So it's kind of like that invasive species indicator that something's not right. So
This person was curious of how often do you need flooding for the oxbow? Every 3 to 5 years, 10 years?
I guess I'll chime in. I mean, I would say this, what's your goal? What's the purpose of the restoration? Is it floodwater storage? Is it fish and wildlife habitat? So for Topeka Shiners, for example, we want those oxbows connecting fairly regularly because we want fish coming and going. And for us, what that means is usually annually to biannually, so every 1 to 2 years, ideally, if not more frequent, but on average. And so, you know, there's mapping resources available that'll help model some of that stuff, and then conservation professionals that can help. But I'd say it always comes back to what the goals of that oxbow restoration are. And, you know, if it's restored and it has that groundwater connection, it's probably going to hold water almost every year, year round. But whether it connects to the stream can be highly variable, depending on what that connection looks like.
All right. I've got one more question before I show the CCA credit information, but then there'll be time for a few more questions, so feel free to get those in. So you've shared some examples where oxbows have been in pastures. This person is curious about, what about bottomland forests?
I'll let Darrick chime in too, but yeah, it's very compatible in that area. I'll probably say what Darrick would say is that you just don't want to have too many trees around the oxbow. You can get a low dissolved oxygen issue with, you know, causing a fish kill. And so otherwise, yeah, no problem having it in a wooded area versus an open. Anything else, Darrick, or did I steal your thunder?
He gave you the thumbs up. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I'll also put this in the chat. But if you watched today to earn a CCA credit, please email me. My email is there by 5 p.m. today with the name that you entered when you registered for the field day and the CCA credit number. And then I invite you all to join us in 2 weeks for our next virtual field day. We're going to be traveling to Northeast Iowa and exploring the work that's being done to improve water quality and quantity issues in the karst topography located in the upper Iowa watershed. So with that, I know there are a few more questions. One in particular, Karen, is related to the tutorial info kit, when and where that will be available. So where should they keep an eye out for when that actually becomes available?
Good question. We haven't landed on exactly where that's going to be housed, but likely it will be housed in a lot of different places. We're going to try to just share it as broadly as possible. So I'm not sure for sure, like the booneriver.org, the Boone River website, but we'll probably have it on a lot of partner websites as well. And it should be kind of like a PDF format. So we'll just sort of email blast it out as well and just have people share it throughout their networks. So sorry, I don't have a better answer, but.
Well, if you get it to us, Karen, we'll help make sure that folks here can find it on our website and our
Perfect.
Outreach as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, so again, if you need that CCA credit information, I've entered that into the chat, so you can just copy my email from there. And let's see, there was one more question. Specifically, conservation professional has been informed by IDALS, Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, that they can't offer cost share for the oxbow unless it can filter tile water. So if we have to connect tile to it, any advice?
I guess I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I guess making sure that the connection of the tile to the oxbow is not going to create, you know, a plunge pool, or that water can gently get into the oxbow. And then also making sure that your connection to the stream is lower than the tile outlets. Obviously we don't want to be backing up any water into the farm tile. So just making sure that the flow of that water can naturally still get out of the oxbow during those high flows. Darrick?
I would just add field tile, okay. Bioreactor tile, not. There has been fish kills from bioreactor tile. There could be again. So, I mean, that's something that could require permitting. I'll just leave it at that, but I think what Karen said is spot on. I mean, in most cases, field tile is completely compatible. There's just the normal considerations with erosion and or tile backup that need to be considered.
So again, this is being recorded, so if you would like to go back and look at it, you can also visit our YouTube channel to find the videos that were featured standalone. So you can always check out those individual videos as well. This is the last question I have. Are soil samples or borings ever used in place of elevations to determine depth of excavations? Kind of a two-part questions. And have there been instances where excavations have gone too deep and created a drainage effect?
You want to take that one, Darrick?
Yeah, I'll start. You fill in if I miss anything. So yeah, in the video you saw me with a soil probe. I will often do that, and I actually find I don't ever do that in place of a survey. So there's always a survey, but I have found, especially in those areas we talked about that are trenched or ditched or dredged or a straightened stream, that the elevations don't necessarily match up and there's something way off, and so that soil sample can really help. It can also tell you if we'll often see these big sand layers, and sand is often not where we're stopping excavation. It's substrate, it's gravel, the stream bed itself. And so, doing that helps you quantify what the spoil is maybe going to consist of as well. So when you're going to take it to a field, do you really want to take poor quality stuff? No. And so that's just another reason to do a soil probe and test. And then as far as digging too deep, I've heard of that happening. I don't have any experience, but that is the absolute reason that we survey with elevations and take soil samples, is that so that we don't. And in my opinion, if you're concerned about that at any point with the contractor, you would stop excavation and not. It's better to stay shallow than it is to go too deep, in my opinion. But it can be very tricky sometimes to figure out where the right spot is, and that's where a conservation professional and folks can help out. So.
All right, so Karen, if you want to throw up your contact slide just one last time in case there's any follow-up questions from today, folks can reach out to you or Darrick with those follow-up questions. But thank you all so much for attending today's virtual field day. It's been a really great pleasure to explore these oxbows and learn more about them and how they can fit back into our landscapes. So again, thank you for attending today, and check your emails this afternoon for a link to this recording.